Hi there, it's Nicole Spohr and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be creating some mostly one layer cards featuring beautiful floral stenciling and some foiling using the Spellbinders Glimmer hot foil system to add sentiments and simple frames to these beautiful floral cards. I created several of these when I was away with some girlfriends several weeks ago on a weekend, and I thought it would be really fun to showcase an assortment of floral type stencils with foiling on top, and I will be creating several of those on camera today. Some of these I won't be sharing on camera, but I have listed the supplies down below and also on my blog. So here are the cards that inspired the foiling and stenciling. These are some Altenew stencils I've used here. You can see I did complete 3 of those cards. And then we're going to be using the Essential Duo Lines Rectangle Glimmer Plates as well as an assortment of stencils. I have some new Pink Fresh stamps and stencils here. I'm only going to be using the stencils today, but if you want, you could get a very similar effect by using the stamp and the stencil if you want a little bit more of an outline to your floral image. I am going to start with the Pink Fresh Studio stencils for my first 2 cards. I'm going to be doing 2 different colorways with the Floral Bunch stencil collection from Pink Fresh Studio. And I'm going to be taping these to my panel using a little repositionable tape. Now this particular stencil set has 6 stencils. They are numbered up in the upper, or I guess all 4 corners I should say. And they're numbered in the upper left corner, and then they have the little notches showing you how to line it up. So this set is made for an A2 sized card. I will be sharing how to use some slimline style stencils or larger stencils as well. I am using an assortment of ink colors, and I'm going to just switch back and forth between the 2 for my first 2 cards. So that first color I used is some Peach Fuzz Pink Fresh Studio ink. And then for the second card, we will be using a little coral reef. So I cleaned my stencil so I wouldn't cross-contaminate the ink colors, and then I will stencil with that coral reef ink. And remember, this is the first layer. Now I figured while I already had all of my supplies out, I had a whole bunch of backgrounds pre-made, and then once I get the Glimmer machine out, I would just go ahead, trim a whole bunch of foil down to size, and glimmer all of these backgrounds at once. This is a great type of project to do if you need multiple cards. So it's just kind of one of those assembly line style projects that I absolutely love, because at the end of it, you end up with so many cards to add to your stash or to go ahead and mail out. Or maybe you even need a group of thank you cards or something similar. You could go ahead and create a whole bunch of those at one time. The next stencil in this set, I'm going to use Fresh Pear Pink Fresh Studio ink as the base color for my leaves. We're going to do this again on both panels. Now, if I was going to be creating a set of cards, I would more than likely pick one of these sets to do all at once. I'm just sharing a couple of different colorways with this stencil, but I also am going to be sharing some other stencils to give you a broader idea of just the different kinds of stencils you can use to create similar looks. Our next step, I'm going to use the Apricot ink from Pink Fresh Studio for the second layer. Then I'm going to clean that stamp, or stencil, pardon me. Tape it on my second background. And we will be using Passion Fruit ink for the second layer here. It is starting to look like flowers. For our fourth stencil, that's going to be more of the detail stencil around the center of the flowers. we will use a little BERRYLICIOUS ink for the red version. For the orange version, our third color will be CLEMENTINE ink. Now the layering for the leaves is our 5th stencil. We're going to use a little olive ink. And look at the detail, so pretty. Let's go ahead and line that up with our second background. And finally, we have our 5th stencil, or 6th stencil, pardon me. And I'm going to use Candy Apple on the red background, which is our deepest, darkest color for the red. And then for our orange background, we will be using Persimmon. And that is going to finish up the stenciling on our first 2 backgrounds. Next up, we are going to use another new-ish stencil collection from Pinkfresh Studio. This is the Miss Your Smile stencil set. Also, there is a coordinating stamp for this. I did not use it. I opted to only use stencils for my cards today. Now, because I am not using this on a slimline style card, which it is made for, it will take a little bit more work. So the base color here for my flower is going to be this really pretty purple color. This is, I want to get the name right, Soft Lilac. And to line it up, I am going to probably need to use my first stencil again. Maybe not. Maybe I don't need it for this one. We're going to use Candy Violet as our second color. And that's going to be the deeper, darker purple color. This stencil has just 4 pieces to it. And then again, we're going to use our 2 green colors that we've already used before, which are Fresh Pear and Olive. These are all Pinkfresh Studio inks. Because this is such a much bigger image, it's not going to take quite as much work, but I really love this. I think it's beautiful and simple. And once we add the foiling, it just brings it to life. Then we're going to use the new Pinkfresh Studio Heartfelt Thanks. Now again, this is a slimline style set, meaning that we're going to have to be a little bit more creative with how we apply this to our panel, since I'm not using like the bottom corner. There are little notches in this if you're using a slimline style, but since I'm not, and it's a little trickier to line up, if I take that previous stencil that I used and layer it on top of the second stencil, it allows me to line up the second stencil much easier. This time I'm using some Lawn Fawn inks. I actually used Ballet Slippers first, and now we're using Minty Fresh. And then we're going to grab our next stencil and do the same thing where we use the previous one to help us line it up. This time I'm going to be using Lawn Fawn Wild Rose ink for the next layer of our flower. And then we will be adding our next layer of the flower image. And again, it's so much easier if you use a previous stencil to line up with what you've already done. This time we'll be using a little cranberry ink. And I didn't feel like that maybe was lined up just right. It's always better to double check before you get started. And my sticky tape was making it so sticky. There we go. And then our last layer here, we are going to use the Peacock Lawn Fawn ink to add the detail for our leaves. So pretty. And I absolutely love that you can use slimline stencils on an A2 card. This is a little number 2 pencil ink for the ink right there in the center of our flower. The final background I'm going to stencil here on camera is actually a 1-layer stencil from Simon Says Stamp. This is the Daisy Bouquet stencil, and I'm going to use some smaller blending tools with Hero Hues reactive inks to add my ink colors. So we're starting with Lemon Drop in the center of our daisies. Then we're going to add a little creamsicle ink. And the little mini blending brushes just give us much more control about where the ink goes. And I don't have to worry about masking anything off this way. The bigger blending brushes might have a tendency to go into areas I don't want them to quite as much, and so I found it easier to use the smaller size blending brush. Then we're going to use a little Fruit Punch ink over the creamsicle near the center of our flowers and blend back out with the orange as needed. And add a little red to the dots here and there. And then I decided to remove the stencil and clean it so I don't accidentally move some of those darker colors of ink into the greenery parts. I'm simply going to line it back up, tape it back in place, and then add some Key Lime Fizz and Green Apple inks to the greenery. I love how this turned out too. So even if you don't have any layering stencils, you can do this with your 1-layer stencils very, very easily. One of the other cards that I pre-made off camera also was made with it's actually 2 layers, but the stencil is just a single stencil that you move. And that is the blue on blue background of the roses. So now we are going to take some Glimmer foil with our little cutting tool, and we're going to use the foil blade and trim up some foil for our backgrounds. You can also use scissors if that is what you have. I am using the Glimmer plates to kind of gauge how big I need the foil to be. It just needs to be slightly larger. I will say that I think I cut my foil too big, and I ended up trimming a lot of it down before foiling it with my Glimmer hot foil system. But to make this as streamlined as possible and to be able to foil my backgrounds all at one time, I went ahead and pre-cut all of my foil. And for the most part, I used a lot of polished brass, which is what I have here, but I will be using a little silver, cobalt blue, and the moon dust. It really depended on the background and what color I thought would complement the background the best. Polished brass or gold is probably my most go-to type of colorway, but I'll show you some of those different options as we get to foiling here in just a minute. We're going to warm up our Glimmer hot foil system. I've turned it on and you can see the red indicator light shows that it's on, and we're going to let it warm up. The second light down will turn green when the platform is ready, and then we will simply place our sandwich on the platform, push the button until that third button or little light glows solid green, and then we'll run it through our die cutting system. I use the Spellbinders Platinum die cutting machine. Now, I like my foil to be slightly smaller than the background of my card. All of my backgrounds are A2 sized, and that is so that I can see where the edge of the panel is for lining up my background. I find it easiest to use a little repositionable tape to tape my frame in place so that it doesn't shift and skew as it runs through the Glimmer machine and die cutting machine. We're using Glimmer plates from the Essential Duo Lines Rectangle collection. I will be using the largest sized from this and also the second largest. This is the largest that I'm using right now, but I will flip-flop from those two sizes for all of my backgrounds. You can also get these in squares and circles. Really awesome, one of my very favorite products from Spellbinders. So you can see I've got it taped in place and I'm going to run it through. Now since I'm not exactly sure where I want the sentiment to go, I'm not going to run them through at the same time. The foil does need, or the Glimmer plate needs to be on the platform first, then your foil, then your paper. I put it together this way and tape it and then place it on the platform so that I know exactly where it's going to be. Now I let it heat up, I pulled it out, I ran it through my Spellbinders Platinum machine, and now I'm going to carefully peel off my Glimmer plate and tape so that I don't tear anything, and then peel up my foil. There might be a bit of overfoiling. You can see a little bit up in the corner. I like a Tombow sand eraser or a little eraser tool. I'm going to use both in the video today to remove that. All of the center area of this particular piece of foil can be reused, so I like to trim away the outside edge of this, and I'm going to be using extra from that piece to foil sentiments. The sentiment for this background is from the YANA'S Sentiments Glimmer and Dye collection. So there are coordinating dyes for this particular Glimmer collection from Spellbinders. That's awesome if you want to foil on a separate piece of paper. Most of my cards are going to be one layer. I'm going to share with you that I did end up using one of the dyes, not because I really wanted to, but because I did not Glimmer straight one of these sentiments, and I was able to kind of cover up that mistake by die cutting another glimmered sentiment, and I will share that with you here in just a little bit. And I'm just removing some of that excess overfoiling with that sand eraser. Try not to erase on the foiling as it will scuff up or dull the foil, but if you can erase around it and remove that excess overfoiling, it looks so much nicer. And then it just has that little Best Wishes glimmered sentiment in the upper right corner of the panel, keeping the focus on the beautiful stenciling and then of course the gorgeous glimmered foil frame and sentiment. Very elegant, simple, beautiful. It's one of my very favorite things to do with glimmered or foiled designs, pardon me. Here is our next background. For this one, I felt like a little moon dust foil would be perfect. The color complements the colors of ink that I used. So just to show a little bit different look with a colorful foil rather than a basic like gold. Now I'm just going to trim away some of that excess foil because I did trim it a little too big. And I reuse my repositionable tape quite a bit if possible. I think that one got stuck on my hand a little bit, or got stuck on itself rather. And then we will foil this background and trim a little piece from the center of this to use for our happy birthday sentiment, which is also from the YANA'S Sentiment collection. I've used 3 different Glimmer sentiment sets throughout. I'm showing 2 on camera, and then I used a 3rd for some of the other cards, which those supplies will be listed below in the supplies as well as over on my blog. Now that the frame is out of the way, I can really see where my sentiment's going to go, and so I can pick the perfect spot and glimmer that next. I'm just going to trim down my foil. Remember, you can save a lot of that extra. I keep all of these little bits and pieces to use on other projects. I didn't cut that big enough, so we'll just save that piece. And I'll trim another piece really quick. You want to trim as close to the glimmer plate as possible. That does eliminate a lot of the overfoiling. My other biggest tip is if you're using the repositionable tape like I am, make sure that it is not super sticky. I like to put it on my hand. It'll pick up some of the oil from your hand and it kind of helps make it a little less sticky, but it still will stick to your project. So there's the happy birthday, but it helps if you don't want to accidentally tear your paper. Let's do our next background. So the thank you for that one was a little wonky, and that's the one I'm going to fix because I absolutely loved my stenciling and I was super bummed that the thank you is skewed. So we're going to fix that by actually foiling this sentiment again and die cutting it. So that is, this card will end up being my not true one layer design. And we're simply going to continue to foil up our backgrounds. Here's that second one. And we're going to use Sending My Love. All of these are from YANA'S sentiments. So there's Sending My Love, Thank You, Greetings, Happy Birthday, and Best Wishes. For this background, this is one of the backgrounds I did off camera with an all-to-new stencil. We're going to foil this one with silver. And this is going to be a two-tone foiled card. The frame is going to be foiled with silver foil. And the sentiment from the Crafty Sentiments Glimmer collection is going to be foiled with cobalt foil. So the deep dark blue is going to kind of pick up from the blue that I used for the inks for stenciling for that one. And I am kind of doing this assembly line style, so as I am removing some of the overfoiling and things from some of the panels, I am working on warming up the next panel to run through my die cutting machine. Once I had my system down, I was just constantly going back and forth to the platform, warming it up and foiling these backgrounds and sentiments. I love the silver too. It's so pretty here. Now I'm going to line up Let's Get Crafty and grab my cobalt blue foil. Using a little tape to hold your sentiments together also helps keep them straight. You can see I tape these together off of the foil, and then I'm going to move them back over to the foil to run it through. And I definitely don't want these to be wonky. There are not coordinating dies. And I also did the same thing for this one, only I used the slightly smaller rectangle duo lines frame and the Hello Crafty Friend sentiment. And then I used the smaller rectangle frame for the purple floral background. And this time we are going to use the polished brass, and we are going to foil the smaller frame and Hello Crafty Friend on that background. This is a fantastic way to use your stencils and your foil plates to create elegant, beautiful cards. I think a frame instantly adds so much to a simple design. It is my #1 favorite way to dress up what can otherwise be a super, super simple card. So while these are still very easy to create, they look very elegant. Here is foiling that thank you on an extra scrap piece of white cardstock, and then taking the coordinating die and die cutting that. You can see that it cuts really close to the sentiment, but that is going to work in our favor because then it's still not going to cover up our stenciling, which is why I wanted this to be one layer. But this is going to save my card because that wonky sentiment was just not doing it for me. And then once we have that die cut, we're going to grab our background and glue this in place. Let me move this out of the way really quick, and let's grab that background. There it is. And if we glue that a little bit straight and cover it up, it's going to fix it perfectly. I'm going to finish the cards with a scattering of little heart accents, and that is it. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this stenciling and foiling video tutorial featuring all kinds of great stencils from Altenew, Pink Fresh Studio, and Simon Says Stamp used with my favorite Spellbinders Glimmer products. The supplies I use to create my cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here is another video featuring some stenciling and foiling that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell to never miss a new card making video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.